You are not imagining this. The world just watched America's closest allies and the Department of Justice do the unthinkable. What you witnessed on the news this morning wasn't just another routine arrest. It was the sitting president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife, Cilia Flores, being led in chains from a military compound in Caracas to the Southern District of New York. But before you believe the mainstream narrative, there is a terrifying question being asked behind closed doors. Is this a triumph of justice, or is the United States abusing its federal criminal courts to force a regime change? Welcome back to Trump News. I am your host, and today we are breaking down the secrets behind the headlines. To understand the earthquake that just hit the international order, we've brought in an insider who knows the system better than anyone. Frank Figliuzzi, a former FBI agent who served at the highest levels of the Bureau for 25 years. As we tape this on a Sunday in January 2026, Maduro is awaiting arraignment on Monday. While the media screams victory, Figliuzzi is warning us of a misuse and even abuse of the legal system. Maduro is a bad dude. There is no question about that. He has rigged elections and run an illegitimate regime. But Figliuzzi has mixed feelings because he sees a new agenda hidden within this freshened-up indictment. The federal courts are being used as a tool for political profit and pleasure. The administration claims this is about narco-trafficking, but the facts don't pass the smell test for anyone paying attention. Just 1 month ago, this same White House watched as a pardon was issued for former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernández, a man actually convicted by a federal jury of exporting 400 tons of cocaine. The trial evidence showed Hernández took bribes from El Chapo himself. Why pardon a convicted kingpin while launching a military raid to arrest Maduro on the exact same charges? Smart people are starting to realize it isn't really about drugs at all. If the U.S. were serious about the fentanyl crisis, the crosshairs would be on Mexico and China. Instead, we are attacking Venezuela and its massive oil wealth. Frank Figliuzzi points out a glaring flaw in the case. The vessels targeted in these operations are often incapable of even making the trip to the U.S., and they carry only a small percentage of the regional cocaine transit. This brings us to the narco-terrorism label. It's a term being slapped on Maduro because the government says so, not because the evidence matches the law.
I was amazed. I happened to have been asleep and got up briefly and said, this is the old FBI 24/7 guy, right? Let me check and see if anything's happening, which is a disaster if you're trying to go back to bed. But sure enough, boom, there it was. And I have to tell you, I had very mixed feelings because I quickly realized they were basing this action on a federal indictment, federal criminal indictment. And you're talking to somebody who spent 25 years in federal law enforcement. So I have to say that I had immediately had torn feelings. One, Maduro's a bad dude, bad guy. He's an illegitimate leader. It's true. He's rigged elections. Yes, I do think he's involved in drugs and gangs, but only in a very gray way that we are yet to totally learn about. And boy, I hope we do learn about it, because the indictment wasn't particularly helpful in reading it. So what's the mixed feeling? The mixed feeling is, okay, we've made an arrest. I get it. It's not the first time in my history that we've gone I don't want to say extrajudicial, but extraterritorial to lay hands on somebody who's indicted, even a leader. But the flip side of that is you can do the right thing for all the wrong reasons. So I am of a mind that this superseding indictment that everybody's pointing to, remember, your listeners know, your viewers know, initially Maduro was indicted in 2020, but we now are looking at a superseding indictment by a grand jury that was freshened up with new intel, but also, I believe, a new agenda, which is we're going to use this as the tool to get regime change. And that's where I'm having the problem. And many people are. But I want to just caution folks that it's easy to fall into a trap here. I see many people I respect across the spectrum of social media wanting to throw out everything about this and say that it's all wrong. And I respect that and want to hear more of that argument, but I can tell you how that's playing on the other side, which is the MAGA crowd, where we should be trying to make some inroads with over this, and we're not succeeding, is saying, look at the liberal tiers. They can't be satisfied. There's a federal indictment. The guy's a bad dude, and they can't be happy about anything. I think it's wrong to say everything about this is wrong. I'm focused squarely on what I believe is a misuse and even abuse of the federal criminal courts to get something done for your own pleasure, benefit, and profit. That's where I'm focused. And I'm also focused on trying to show the MAGA crowd that if they think this is going to help them, if they think this is going to get better prices at the gas pump or whatever the heck they think, I go, yeah, you got that all wrong.
The textbook definition of narco-terrorism involves groups like the Taliban using drugs to fund ideological violence. Can the U.S. prove Maduro is anything more than a leader who simply looks the other way? If they can't, this entire case is built on a foundation of sand. Do you believe the U.S. government has the power to kidnap anyone, anywhere on Earth, drag them into a courtroom and simply say, it's legal because we say so? This isn't a plot from a Hollywood thriller. It is the cold, hard legal reality facing Nicolás Maduro right now. While the media celebrates this as a 21st century Noriega precedent, former FBI agent Frank Figliuzzi is sounding the alarm. We are using self-styled legal definitions to mask a calculated political operation. Let's look at the ghost of Manuel Noriega. In 1989, the U.S. invaded Panama to seize its leader on drug charges. Frank Figliuzzi reminds us that, legally, American judges are trained to accept a defendant as they come, regardless of how they were brought to the bench, whether through official extradition or rendition, a fancy legal term for kidnapping. But there is a massive distinction here. In 1989, the Panamanian legislature had formally declared war on the United States. In 2026 Venezuela, we are acting as a global policeman with no checks, no balances, and no clear boundaries. The most controversial pillar of this case is the charge of narco-terrorism. Frank Figliuzzi is blunt. The concept as applied here does not match the actual law. A textbook example of narco-terrorism is the Taliban, or Al-Qaeda, groups that grow poppies and produce heroin specifically to fund ideological violence and global terror. But what about Maduro? The freshened-up 2026 indictment offers only vague claims that he was knowledgeable or looked the other way while drugs moved through his territory. Frank asks a question every American taxpayer should ponder. Does the government have a single shred of evidence that Maduro is using drug money to fund terror attacks against the U.S.? Or are we simply slapping the terrorist label on a violent street gang like Tren de Aragua because it's politically convenient? This is a dangerous gray zone of power. If we accept that the administration can label any criminal gang a terrorist organization just to use the military to grab a foreign leader, the line between law enforcement and military invasion disappears. Figliuzzi warns this is a blatant misuse and abuse of federal courts for political pleasure and profit. While the public cheers the fall of a dictator, Figliuzzi urges us to look past the liberal tears and MAGA cheers. The real issue isn't Maduro's character, it's the distortion of the American justice system to serve a secret agenda. Why are Mexico and China, the true sources of the fentanyl killing tens of thousands of Americans, not labeled narco-terrorists? Why target Venezuela, which holds the one thing politicians crave most? The world's largest oil reserves. Did you ever wonder why the same government that spent years convicting a high-level drug kingpin suddenly lets him walk free, only to launch a military raid for the exact same crime somewhere else? If you think the arrest of Nicolás Maduro is about stopping drugs from hitting your neighborhood, you need to look at what happened just 30 days ago. While Maduro was being flown to a New York jail, former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernández, a man convicted by a U.S. jury of smuggling 400 tons of cocaine, was walking out of a federal prison with a full presidential pardon. This isn't just a contradiction, it is a bombshell that exposes the real agenda behind the Maduro prosecution. Former FBI agent Frank Figliuzzi points to this Honduras hypocrisy as the smoking gun. Hernandez's conviction was based on overwhelming evidence, He took millions in bribes from El Chapo and used the Honduran military to protect drug shipments. Yet, the current administration pardoned him, claiming he was a victim of over-prosecution. Meanwhile, the indictment against Maduro relies on narco-terrorism charges that Figliuzzi calls legally vague and convoluted. If the mission in Caracas was truly about public health and the fentanyl crisis, the crosshairs would be on Mexico and China. But as Vice President J.D. Vance recently admitted, the focus isn't just on the drugs, it's on the stolen property. Vance defended the military action by citing Venezuela's nationalization of American-owned oil assets 20 years ago, bluntly asking, "Are we just supposed to allow a communist to steal our stuff and do nothing? Great powers don't act like that." Trump himself has been even more transparent, announcing that the United States will run Venezuela and tap its huge oil reserves after snatched Maduro. This shift from law enforcement to national interest is exactly what troubles legal experts like Figliuzzi. He warns that we are witnessing a misuse and abuse of the federal criminal courts to achieve pleasure, benefit, and profit, using a drug indictment as a convenient mask for a resource grab. Furthermore, a U.S. intelligence assessment from April 2025 found no coordination between the Trendy gang and the Maduro government. Yet, the December 2025 superseding indictment claims the exact opposite to justify the narco-terrorism label. When the intelligence community and the DOJ's indictment don't align, smart people have to ask, who is telling the truth and who is writing a script for regime change? When was the last time you saw a B-52 Stratofortress or a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier deployed to take out a wooden fishing boat? In the official briefing rooms of Washington, the 2025 campaign known as Operation Southern Spear is described as a high-stakes interception of narco-terrorist vessels. But if you look at the technical data, a different and far more disturbing picture emerges. Former FBI agent Frank Figliuzzi has pointed to a glaring physical impossibility in this case. The government is claiming these small, rickety boats are a direct threat to the American mainland, despite the fact that most of them are literally incapable of making the trip. Between September 2025 and January 2026, the U.S. military conducted at least 35 lethal strikes on vessels in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, killing over 115 people. The administration, led by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, framed these as surgical strikes against Trendy TDA traffickers. However, as Roxana Vigil of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, noted, there is a massive mismatch between the force used and the actual target. We are seeing the USS Gerald R. Ford and MQ-9 Reaper drones utilized to vaporize small civilian craft that Figliuzzi notes are often intended for regional transit, not for the long-haul journey to U.S. shores. The evidence itself is even more elusive. President Trump famously claimed that after one strike, big bags of cocaine and fentanyl were spattered all over the ocean. Yet the Department of War has failed to release a single photograph or satellite image confirming this. Frank Figliuzzi, who spent 25 years analyzing federal evidence, knows that in a court of law, because we say so isn't enough. If these vessels were indeed carrying thousands of tons of cocaine as the SDNY indictment alleges, where is the physical proof? Furthermore, Figliuzzi highlights that the cocaine found in this region typically originates in Colombia, not Venezuela. By focusing the military's might on Venezuelan waters, the administration is bypassing the real source countries and focusing on a transit zone that happens to sit on top of the world's most strategic oil lanes. This technical mismatch suggests that the boat strikes weren't just about drugs. They were a blockade in all but name, designed to cripple the Venezuelan economy and set the stage for the January 3rd extraction of Maduro. As we examine the narco-terrorism label, we have to ask, if the vessels can't reach the U.S. and the intelligence community disputes the link between Maduro and the TDA gang, what exactly was being interdicted during those 35 deadly strikes? What happens when the rules-based order decides that there are no rules left? For decades, the United States has positioned itself as the moral arbiter of global justice, but the 2026 extraction of Nicolás Maduro has ripped a hole in the fabric of international law that may never be mended. Former FBI agent Frank Figliuzzi is raising a question that should keep every American leader awake at night. If we have decided that an indictment in a New York court is a valid ticket to kidnap a foreign head of state, What is to stop another country from doing the exact same thing to us? In the world of high-level federal law enforcement, there is a fancy word for what happened in Caracas: rendition. But as Figliuzzi bluntly reminds us, that is just a legal euphemism for kidnapping. Throughout his 25-year career, Figliuzzi saw the FBI manhandle suspects off the streets of Pakistan or lure them onto yachts with undercover agents. While these tactics were effective against isolated terrorists, applying them to a sitting president, regardless of how illegitimate he may be, removes the final guardrails of global diplomacy. The danger lies in the precedent. Figliuzzi asks, where does that end? If any government can simply issue an indictment and then send a SWAT team into a foreign nation to execute its own laws, the concept of national sovereignty is dead. This isn't just about Maduro. It's about the risk of a tit-for-tat world where American officials traveling abroad could be snatched off the streets of friendly countries, if, as Figliuzzi cynically notes, we have any of those left by the end of 2026. Furthermore, the constitutional stress test isn't just happening abroad. It's happening right here in our own courtrooms. Figliuzzi is deeply troubled by the misuse and even abuse of the federal criminal courts to achieve what is clearly a military and political goal. When we use a drug indictment as a proxy for war, we are forcing judges to become political actors. As the Maduro case moves toward a potential trial in Manhattan, the court must decide if it will accept a defendant who was brought before it through what some call extrajudicial means. We are entering a gray zone where the law is being rewritten on the fly to suit the pleasure, benefit, and profit of the executive branch. By blurring the lines between police work and regime change, the administration is betting that the public's dislike for Maduro will blind them to the erosion of the legal standards that protect everyone, including Americans. Imagine being a federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice, handed the case of the century against a world leader, only to realize that your primary evidence is built on political quicksand. Behind the scenes in Washington, there is a growing panic that the 2026 prosecution of Nicolás Maduro is not the slam dunk the White House promised. Former FBI agent Frank Figliuzzi has pointed to a new agenda behind the freshened-up indictment, one that relies more on political pleasure and profit than on ironclad criminal proof. This raises a chilling possibility. Is the government so afraid of this case failing that they will never actually let it reach a jury? As a veteran of 25 years in federal law enforcement, Figliuzzi knows how to read between the lines of a legal document. He notes that while Maduro was initially indicted in 2020, the current administration produced a superseding indictment in late 2025 to justify the military operation. While this new document was supposedly freshened up with new intel, Figliuzzi warns that it also carries a new agenda, using the criminal courts as a tool for regime change. This creates a massive problem for the career lawyers at the DOJ who have to prove these charges beyond a reasonable doubt in the Southern District of New York. The core of the problem is the narco-terrorism charge. As we've discussed, Figliuzzi argues that the concept simply does not match the legal definition. If the DOJ cannot prove that Maduro was directly enabling or profiting from drug trafficking specifically to fund terrorist activities against the U.S., the top charges will likely be dismissed by a judge. Figliuzzi warns that the indictment wasn't particularly helpful in reading it, suggesting that the government's public narrative is far stronger than its actual courtroom evidence. This evidentiary gap is why many insiders believe this case may never make it to trial. In federal court, the discovery process would force the U.S. government to turn over its intelligence files, potentially exposing how the narco-terrorism label was manufactured. A failed trial wouldn't just be an embarrassment, it would be a geopolitical catastrophe, proving to the world that the U.S. used its legal system to kidnap a foreign leader on false pretenses. Figliuzzi's mixed feelings reflect a deep divide within the Bureau and the DOJ. On one side are the political appointees pushing for a victory in Caracas. On the other are the career investigators who fear that doing the right thing for all the wrong reasons will permanently damage the integrity of American justice. We are watching a high-wire act where one slip could end the credibility of the U.S. federal courts on the global stage. Have you ever felt like you're being sold a dream, only to find out it was a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep you from asking the hard questions? In the wake of the Maduro arrest, the internet is flooded with liberal tears memes and America First celebrations. But former FBI agent Frank Figliuzzi is warning that both sides of the political spectrum are being led into a trap. While the base cheers for the takedown of a dictator, the hidden costs of this operation are about to hit your wallet in a way that no campaign slogan can fix. Figliuzzi observes a fascinating and dangerous divide in how this event is being played. On one side, the MAGA crowd is mocking the liberal tears of those concerned about international law, viewing the arrest as a long-overdue assertion of American strength. On the other side, many liberals and even some staunch America First conservatives are feeling a deep sense of betrayal. One conservative critic noted, "One of the things I loved most about Trump was how he generally kept the U.S. military out of foreign affairs. This goes against his core platform entirely." But the biggest piece of bait in this trap is the promise of lower gas prices. The administration is banking on the idea that Americans will overlook the legal extrajudicial nature of the arrest if it means saving a few dollars at the pump. Frank Figliuzzi is blunt with his warning to the base. "If you think this is going to get better prices at the gas pump, you got that all wrong. The reality is that Venezuela's oil infrastructure is creaking and in total decay after decades of mismanagement. Business analysts confirm that it would take billions of dollars in investment and several years before Venezuelan oil could have a major impact on American gas prices. In fact, the market is currently responding more to a global supply surplus than to the news of Maduro's removal. So, while the administration talks about running the country and taking back our stuff, the American taxpayer is the one likely to be left holding the bill for a nation-building project we were told would never happen again. We are watching a regime change operation disguised as a drug bust, and the America First movement is being used as a shield for a return to global policing. As Figliuzzi points out, we are sacrificing the integrity of our courts for a benefit and profit that may never materialize for the average citizen. We have spent this entire investigation peeling back the layers of the 2026 Maduro arrest, from the technical failures of the maritime operations to the blatant hypocrisy of the Hernandez pardon. But now, we must face the most uncomfortable truth of all. The arrest of Nicolás Maduro may be the event that finally shatters the Western alliance for good. As former FBI agent Frank Figliuzzi warned, we are entering a world where American power is no longer seen as a shield, but as a risk factor that even our closest friends must protect themselves from. As we look toward the future, the real question isn't whether Maduro spends the rest of his life in a U.S. prison. The question is whether the United States can remain the trusted anchor of the democratic world when it treats the international legal system like a personal playground. We are already seeing the cracks. Historical allies, the EU, the UK, Canada, and Australia, are not just expressing concern. They are moving toward coordinated sanctions against the very American institutions that authorize this extrajudicial raid. When the world's chief sanctioner becomes the target, the entire global order flips on its head. Frank Figliuzzi's observation about friendly countries is no longer just a warning. It is a strategic reality. If America's allies start holding back intelligence through the Five Eyes network because they no longer trust the institutional guardrails of Washington, that isn't just a diplomatic snub. It is a survival move that leaves everyone less safe. The narco-terrorism indictment was sold to the public as a move to protect American streets, but if it results in the isolation of the U.S. economy and the fracture of NATO, the price of this justice will be far higher than anyone anticipated. We are witnessing a stress test of the entire idea that America can lead the free world while looking, to its own friends, more and more like the regimes it used to contain. Nicolás Maduro may be a dictator, but in 2026, he has become something else, a mirror. By looking at how the system handled his case, we see a reflection of the current path of American leadership. Are we still a nation of laws, or have we become the rogue regime that our own allies now fear? The answer to that question will define the remainder of this century. Thank you for following this investigation. If you value analysis that explains the deeper system rather than just the surface chaos, this is your space. Share this with those who need to see the full picture, because an informed public is the only real guardrail left.